You suddenly speak a different language quite fluently. Even it appears as though you have mastered a different smile in each picture. We suspect that you're a work of fiction. Are you? There are people coming.
H is answering.
But if the papers are true, you're one of the most wanted fugitives of the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. And you met an important figure when you visited Bekaa for your project of developing extremely potent hashish oil. It is an irony of history that you both decided to disappear in the same year. The same history that you defy by stubbornly maintaining your status of being its fiction. We are reaching out to you now because we thought you might be able to help us find an artifact of some sort. We are very impressed by your widespread reach in the smuggling networks. If you are agreeable, please just summon us casually. I am dead, and my partner is a monster, and we don't believe in bad narrative suspense. Looking forward, Dead S. P.S. I'm not certain of my sincerity composing this letter anymore. While living, I was thinking all about death, but my stay here made me realize that I am forever on the side of living. So then at last, maybe everyone got it wrong. Dear H, when you look at a still image, do you scan the surface like a landscape from object to object? If so, do you think of the image as still or as moving, as photography or as film? We feel we are scanning the landscape of death, but all we see is the fleeting radiance of something absolute, like an action broken from thought. Please help us reach our goal. They write another letter and another one for 7 days and 7 nights, and there they slowly emerge into the Arabian Nights according to Pasolini. H has decided to ignore them. Possibly he disliked the tone of the letters. Dead S thinks guiltily, for she was responsible for the tone, and M for the form. Each time one writes a letter, a phantom consumes its kisses before it arrives, perhaps before it leaves, so that it is already necessary to write another one. Deleuze writes this about Kafka, how he diagnosed the means of communication to manufacture ghosts. Meanwhile, they remain in H's old room in the St. George Hotel. They have no sense of giving up, for one can only give up in the foreground of a limited time, where a better thing to do is discerned in the horizon of action. Their time is provided by Zarwan, the deity responsible for the boundless time, who patented our bounded time millenniums ago. News often wait for the hope to die, and good news come with D, H's fixer, the keeper of collapsing wars and touchy-feely politics. Three days after the first meeting with H, they go down to the valley again. This car is tight and full of junk. Inevitably, they follow the way of obnoxious couples and merge into the pronoun I, feminine for the sake of it. D tells I stories from his shady past, and I goes easy on his lies, his recently aborted child, the traffic jams and his asthma attacks, his precocity and precognitions, the life of a fixer. I wonders whether he dislocates information out of kindness, compulsion, or apathy, like when he tells everyone I is from London, which is by all means unnecessary. In the village, they pick up D's friend G, which I can't tell if he's blonde and old, or actually just an albino. G occasionally takes from her cigarettes and leaves a bunch of grapes in her hand. They barely look at each other, they don't talk. Low-tech unions are very easy. Soon they will find out that H is not around that day. In the meantime, they drive in rounds and rounds in what I is certain to be a performance of caring by Dee and entourage. The sound is the record of phlegm, men coughing up oceans of mucus and waves of spit. The sound is gooey and not quite as wild as it likes to be. As technology, I think hashish manipulates the secretion of body fluids. This is rather site-specific, maybe because the residents come from the line of Syrian stones, which Artaud claims are alive, and sometimes are living as plants or animals live, shifting, swelling, shrinking, rhythmically and internally. Artaud also writes about Julia Domna, tall and leaden complexion, with the sign of Saturn upon her brow, resembling the moonstone, or a statue of injustice, injustice overcoming fate, who's bound up with the stones in Syria, all in accord with the horoscope that destines her one day to be wife to an emperor and to give birth to Jetta and Caracalla. To make sure, Artaud emphasizes 4 times in 2 pages, some stones do live, and the stones of Syria are alive, as miracles of nature, for these are stones flung from the sky. The Heliopolis ruins of Baalbek once belonged to H's ancestor, the Roman sun god emperor Heliogabalus, a parading image of anarchy and totality, at whose heart lay the ultimate will to order. To will something is to change the tempo. So it seems to appear, in a distant time, a vision of the new criminal and his beloved principle, pleasure. Heliogabalus enters Rome on the dawn of the Ides of March, and he enters it backwards, preceded by the giant phallus, the black stone thrown from the sun. From the viewpoint of Roman custom, this means that Heliogabalus is entering Rome as a ruler, but backwards, annoying the hell out of the Roman council. Heliogabalus drops the Roman toga, assumes the Phoenician purple, sporting on his pubis a sort of iron spider whose legs tear at his skin and draw blood with each excessive movement of his thighs, dusted with saffron, his dick dipped in gold. The body-modified Heliogabalus, like a hooligan and an irreverent libertarian, overturning the received order, choosing ministers by the size of their pricks, and appointing magistrates with the job of systematically perverting the young. From blood, cruelty, and wars Heliogabalus waged, a magical soma bloomed in Bekaa, and affirmed the expansionist logic of anarchy. Generations of smugglers diffused the hashish plague in all directions, weaving a rampant network of fumes and flows underneath the regulated lines of access. And so the spewing, expelling, and spitting of the soma, I believe firmly, is part of the dissident history of hashish. 3 days ago during the interview, H had opened up about his 10 wives. 10 was too perfect a number for a confession, and I was taking most matters with a grain of salt. He said that Lebanese women go bad quickly, that they're good only for 1 year. 10 quickly, 1, quantifications and qualifications. I had to ask why. The inquisitive tone killed the men's joy. H said when they stop taking care of themselves, he puts them in the retirement home, their own mansion, he meant, and pays them a salary. He said there was one last year who could not stand the lifestyle and begged him to let her go. I had failed to channel her dissatisfactions, and now her body was jerking to the idea of indecency. For I had been very nice in public these days, and suddenly all bodies were on the line. The later display of H's collection of artillery went like vaccination. Shooting the gun was a sex change operation gone whack. I was dumped into an assortment of genitals. H excelled gleefully. 3 days later, I asked to spend the night in H's family residence. 3 days before, H agreed to help I find the Zeej. Zeej was the diary of the sky. When there was still no concept for attention, sailors and expeditors utilized the Zeech to wander the thought. Zeech was the plane on which faith and experience superimposed, body to body, organ to organ. To be clear, Zeech was the ground zero for necrophiliac activities. For instance, the early Zeech was where astronomy and astrology shared skin, and the cinema screen could be said to emerge from the same lineage, where the dead audience would press itself against the living movie characters. H's solution was simple, a restructuring of international order. This would most likely precipitate the sun and set off the acceleration. In response, the sun would go hysteric, switching between retrograde and prograde motion like a fish out of water. In this time of volatility, time of div, it is generally advised to take opposite decisions. So like if I is decisive on spending the night in Bekaa, I must change her mind. Yet of course the change of mind encourages yet another opposite decision ad infinitum. Insecurity is the psychopathology of regression, psyche becoming an amorphous cloud, ADHD becoming paranoia, claustrophobia, and dissociative fugue, shock increasingly losing in value. H's mansion is surprisingly humble. No art but artifice, tattooed eyebrows and bleached hair. Madame E. H's wife is sad. She expresses it first with her signature eye rolling, and then with words, "I'm really sad." Her brother is a mafioso under arrest in Sweden, and her son is a killer and a fugitive with a temper. But none of this is remotely agonizing compared to her almost non-existent marital love. She's sad, but so is Coco, which is not her real name, but is what she's been yelled by every few minutes to bring and return few designated items back and forth to and from the kitchen. The reverberating cries of Coco, 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 bird calls, cat calls, WhatsApp calls, coffee cups, cigarette puffs, gunshots, and heavy accents. The echoing ecology indicates the house. As long as I is in this house, I is complicit in its dwellers' abused economy. And I is determined, at least for an exercise, to not judge. This is certainly not your Bora Bora kind of trip. Brian Massumi has this thing to say about the distinction of affect and emotion, which we tend to confuse as one and diagnose its demise. If anything, our condition is characterized by a surfeit of affect. If some have the impression that affect has waned, it is because it is unqualified. As such, it is not ownable or recognizable, and is thus resistant to critique. Once belonging to haikus and anthropomorphic tropes, and now transpersonal or irreducible to experience, affects are now to be found outdoors, in the flora and fauna of creation. Hence, sadness as not a narcissistic expression of emotion, but as the sadness of being, the sadness of the Big Bang, even the sadness of the Homo sapien as a thing. Who is more unhappy? He who feels his own loneliness, or he who feels the loneliness of the world? Writes Emil Chiara. This cannot but make I feel guilty for Coco. Rationally, I want an existential sadness to remain between them. Its overflow does not bother her. No matter how many sensationalized stories of the migrant workers from Southeast Asia leaving their families behind to earn a few dollars I has encountered on Facebook. Somehow, I must remain uncomfortable with Coco's pain. Discomfort sounds like the proper noun for contingency. Obviously, I too is not ready to acknowledge Coco's agency. The moonstone, the statue of injustice, Julia Domna, I calls Coco. Realism, as much as a non-existential, human autonomous field, is the property of the truly sad people, the surplus of an alienated labor. I think of Pedro Costa, who adores realism to the extent that he never starts from a shot, a frame, or a scene. No, it's not to indulge in one's own mental image, Costa says. It is trying to figure out why something is sad. Cognitively speaking, I know a thing or two about fear, sadness, joy, and shame. From cookbooks to nuclear negotiations, they show up often followed by a kind of repentance. In her letters to Dick, Chris Kraus recalls a song by Evelyn Champagne King in the 70s when Kraus was working as a stripper in New York. Shame, what you do to me is a shame. I'm only trying to ease the pain. Deep in your arms is where I want to be. Kraus says, 'cause shame was what we always felt, me and my girlfriends, for expecting sex to breed complicity. Complicity is like a girl's name. This reminds the shame that lives inside memory and shows face in the moments of remembrance as the world ceaselessly forgets, and difference becomes a corporation which elects the sham chain to run its policies. Maggie Nelson, happily married to a transgender man, perceives her image in her friend's eyes, heteronormative, pregnant, pictured on a Christmas mug along her queer family, and in this, she finds an occasion for transcendence. The moment of queer pride is a refusal to be shamed by witnessing the other as being ashamed of you. Isn't Nelson missing the point here, that it is not so much about the other being ashamed of you as the other shaming you? Being ashamed is too reverent, too sweet. It's for those who don't hug but shake hands. Coco is not only stripped of her gender, but is reassigned a new body, a body hanging from a name construct. We are in an urgent need of an expanded queerness. In the final scene of The Bicycle Thieves, the exorcist aligns the viewer's neck on the axis of Bruno's gaze and unleashes the terror. Cinema does this, sweet-talking one to a dark room and locking her up with her demons. But fear is a complex sensation, non-linear, mutable, and dynamic, rather than a mere complicated one. H should have known all along that fear eats the soul. I wanted to hand him his image, and instead was given her own. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Circumstances are not written in stone. You can't approach an experience with an agenda. When in fear, the capacity for learning expands, like when God ordered the illiterate prophet to read, Iqra, and he did so in sheer angst. I's dream that night captured the entire soundscape of Arabic enunciation, with no subtitles whatsoever. A child becoming in language, an express epiphany. For the child, a sense of history, both his own and particularly that of others, comes only with the full acquisition of language. For in joining himself to language, the child enters a world of conventions, which he has had no role in shaping. This, Rosalind Krauss calls the movement from the imaginary to the symbolic, from the atemporal, sinless kid to the political infant hooked onto history. Unlearning language, aphasia, is the first stage of developing dementia. A self without emotions contemplates emotions without a self. Warhol wrote this in his diaries. I don't really know if I was ever capable of love, but after the 60s, I never thought in terms of love again. What remained of emotions? Almost everything. They are everywhere, they're out there, but they are no more ours. If shame rotates the head, fear breaks the neck free. The dinner is simple and quick. H inquires about her progress in disturbing the international order. I thought a lot about women and emotions, I replies, hoping this would mean something to her long-term task. H, of course, finds this utterly stupid, a waste of time. I should be more proactive and stop quoting people, he says. You won't be able to see the Zij unless you change your outlook. I mean it. You need a synthetic eye. To learn about the common eye, the migraine eye, which points inward and not outward, and causes an immeasurable pain, H passes on R's contact to I. Intimidating as this all sounds, the migraine eye is basically a cup used in the scrying practices, although regressive emperors occasionally drink from it in private. H speculates that R is in possession of the migraine eye that has long been associated with the third eye of Zarwan, the deity of unbounded time. This sets forth a tricky conundrum because the eye technically contains the entire content of the universe, including the countless universes of stories, which themselves include Borges' cellar and the universe of Aleph. And so locating the eye will be to spot all the contingent universes inside the universe. This would mean a whistleblowing operation in the scale of fiction. On this note, I hits the road. R's fields are on the northeastern edge of Bekaa. In the vicinity of his property, objects conjure into perception in perpendicular lines. His substance tranquilizes attention by keeping it restrained, keeping it in check. Reaching the horizon of his state on the winding road, eye captures the following sight: a rocky landscape in full HD, perhaps in 4K quality, I thinks, on top of a summit, somewhere on the anti-Lebanon mountain range, I thinks. Anti-Lebanon, not Lebanon, for the weight of something lacking is bearing upon her. Snow falling in super slow motion, gray pixelated sky. In the background, an upscale facility on the highest point of the road, a digital scenery, not in decimals, but a more intricate CGI, I think. The receptionist has the determined straight lips of the common female Lebanese physiognomy. Her face reflects a shade of melancholy mixed with sunlessness. Her close-up is of every receptionist, timeless, eternal. She has no desire to help her. I eventually asked for permission to take a stroll in the facility by herself. Out of apathy, the permission is granted. I gathers from this brief exchange and the mock props surrounding her that I is in the premises of a blockbuster documentary film about a drug rehabilitation center. Her walk seems excessively stagey all of a sudden. Her sneakers click-clack on the soft padded floor. The hallways are spacey and slightly inclined to impose a minimal subconscious exercise on the recovering addicts, I think. The doors on the sides of the hallway swing outward, indicating that the occupants mostly walk outside, leaving the doors open, and upon returning to their rooms, they close the doors again. It was perhaps to keep the rooms and psyche on the same recreational plane. A surprisingly low-tech sun is setting from the window at the end of the corridor. This perhaps is the setting sun on the Rausha from Walid Raz's video piece, I Only Wish That I Could Weep, a found footage to be lost soon. A soft yet informative feminine voice reads the following passage over the window frame. Cut. The crew goes on a break, but not the writers of I, A, and B, lying in the memory of a day in the summer of 2015 on the Hollywood beach in Chicago. The sun continues setting on the Lake Michigan. A introduced B to Elizabeth Bishop's poetry. She was writing the last scene of her feature-length film that dealt with puberty suspension for genderqueer children. She made the film last summer. B doesn't know if she ever included this scene from the first draft. They live apart now and they barely talk. But if the present is sort of organized by the future, B's pretty sure that in 2011, she was the character of A's story, J, a 10-year-old suspended on gender, reciting this poem as the camera reroutes to follow a stranger jogging deep into the woods. At evening, something behind me. I start for a second, I blench, or staggeringly halt and learn, I do not know my age. In the morning, it is different. An open book confronts me, too close to read in comfort. Tell me how old I am. Injecting her body with testosterone gel, Paul B. Preciado writes, applied to a woman's body, testosterone distorts that body's relationship to the course of time, as well as its value on the heterosexual market. The temporal logic of the genders is asymmetric. Femininity loses value 3 times faster than does masculinity. In other words, a woman, whether cis or trans, is out of the heterosexual market at 45, whereas a man can reach 65 before becoming obsolete. Sitting with Madam E last night, they went over the list of drugs they've tested. Madam E is much more experienced, 50 years of oral history in a nutshell. The coffee's on the stove, children are in bed, women's bodies are delimited and deranged in very precise ways. That they can share with language the junk they have consumed is for some reason consoling to her crashing feminism. And then the valley stuff, impenetrable mist, like cotton in my ears, I do not know my age. I do not mean to complain, they say it is my fault. Nobody tells me anything. Tell me how old I am. The film crew does a smooth dolly in as I enters the therapist's office. There they find the walls smothered with vitality. Life isn't about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. Life is very interesting in the end. Some of your greatest pains become your greatest strength. Life is not a bitch. Life is a beautiful woman. The wall inscription is reminding that the constitution of the war on drugs is built on the sovereign rule of life. Culture, addiction centers, TED Talks, parents, walls like this wall and most other walls are complicit in bringing the addict who has already passed away across and beyond back to life. The camera types on a hopeless plea in the piercing form of all uppercase. Try, try, try not to lose hope. The deepest demarcations can slowly spread and fade. Like any blue tattoo, I do not know my age. Shadows fall down, lights climb, clambering lights, oh children, you never stay long enough. Tell me how old I am. There is a form of contingency that does not unfold in time, but in the material medium of writing. These bodies, I think, are every inch that book, on which time is inscribed in a single stroke. Bodies that are not in a state, do not have a state. Bodies of chemical precarity. Rehabilitation is basically the pulling apart and repairing of that queer clock to the rhythm of our arbitrary time. And when we tell ourselves that we have reached the paroxysm of horror, blood and flouted laws, of poetry which consecrates revolt, we are obliged to advance still further into an endless vertigo. And vertigo is it, as I walks down the hallway and is sucked into the nurse room. Her pulse rests into the punctuation of small talks, stamps, paperwork, and the copy machine. Stone wings have sifted here, with feather hardening feather. The claws are lost somewhere, I do not know my age. I am growing deaf, the bird calls dwindle, the waterfalls go unwiped. What is my age? Tell me how old I am. Let the moon go hang, the stars go fly their kites. I want to know my age, tell me how old I am. Jump cut, I folds the letter, put it in the envelope, and slide it under his door. Dear R, reading into signs and finding meaning in things for some reason have gone obsolete. We urgently need an answer from you. Does the migraine eye belong to the realm of fantasy, or is it a BBC documentary? The answer would dictate the effort we'll invest in making a meaning out of it. Call us romantic, it doesn't bother us. There is no forgetting that doesn't generate the scars of remembrance. If the photographic index has gradually given way to presence, the here and now of the Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, what has become of the documentary? Perhaps the document now attends in the flesh. Needless of attorneys, it recites its own text and represents itself. This new document relies on but one dictum, that the presence of the document is the document of presence. If the migraine eye is this blockbuster documentary we are unwillingly partaking in, our chronicle in Bekaa would probably be that broken siege, that twisted diary of the sky. Or maybe the diary is the documentary, that which recounts the facticity of fiction. Was it really that easy? We are genuinely confused. Sincerely, I, still representing A and B and all those haunting them. We could not come up with a signature. P.S. We want to dedicate this letter to you. Yesterday we found your lost footage. When you started losing weight, it seemed like you were losing it. The nostalgic sense of missing, to perceive with regret, the absence or loss of something or someone, comes from the 15th century emergence of self-awareness. Before the 13th century, to miss basically meant to go wrong, to fail. To miss you then is to go wrong, to make a mistake. You wrote that eventually you're not as destructive as you thought you are, because you still don't want to be misunderstood. And this, in retrospect, had to do something with our escalating gossip hours, we guess. You cheated then by designing the conditions of your failure. You even wrote a suicide note and installed it as art. Though the constructive undertone of that piece went completely unnoticed, you still did not fail. An unfailing failure to fail is the building matter to our projects. Missing you then is to give up to irony. It's failing to fail to fail. Quick tip, write in sentiments, edit in irony. We dedicate this to you because, as Anne Carson writes, a dedication has to be flawed if the book is to remain free. How else to be free if not open to anxiety?